Mouse Rebel News fans, I'm going to explain the Greek debt crisis, since there's a great deal of confusion as to what caused it. Now, the Randroids, or Rand Pauls, or whatever you want to call them, declare that social programs harm people. I know it's dumb. So I'm going to actually explain the credit crisis to my Marxist, anarchist, basically anti-capitalist viewers. Now, you see, Greece is in debt because it did not follow the Maastricht rules. Now, the EU Maastricht rules state that the budget deficit cannot exceed 3%, and government debt cannot exceed 60%. See, now what they do is when they get into debt, they do and this is not just Greece, a lot of countries do this, they call what's called a cross-currency swap. Say their debt for Greece is about 10 billion. So you got 10 billion in Greek debt. So what they decide to do is a cross-currency swap. So the debt becomes issued in dollars, yen, Swiss francs, whatever. Now, with this debt, the same way all capitalist countries are previously used to do, like they issue bonds. Now, what they do is they'll issue the bonds in francs or yen or what have you. So they issue the bonds in another currency. So, meaning, they get the bonds, take the bond money, promise to pay it back. Of course, like all bonds, all loans, they do have to be paid back. However, Goldman Sachs came up with a really cute little trick that, while technically legal, is a complete scumbag job. Now, what they do is you take the Greek debt and they created a special currency swap just for Greece, where it had X. Now, X became an artificial exchange rate, or should I say fictional exchange rate, meaning it wasn't real, they just made it up themselves. Now, by creating an insanely large exchange rate, that 10 billion became somewhat like 12 billion in the new currency. So they were able to get some extra money. This isn't the exact debt, and that's not the exact exchange, it's just for display purposes. So in other words, they got more money than they were actually selling bonds for. Now, as I said, bonds, like all debts, have to be repaid. However, here's the scumbag part. You have your nation. And at the end, every nation, when they do their books, they have the plus column and they have the negative column. Obviously, any liabilities, government debts, blah, 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 blah. And, trade, any kind of tariffs or stuff like that goes in the plus column. Now, normally, a debt, which you would have, as every country does, you had a debt of, say, 10 billion. But because you transferred it into bonds with an artificial exchange rate, it's now an investment, not a liability. Very, very sneaky way. Now, basically what happens is Greece just kept doing this through successive governments, both liberal, right-wing, all of them, they all did this. Every time the debt came up, they just added more and more. So, essentially, you got this big, massive bonus and not a liability of what it actually is. Now, usually it takes years to pay these back, and this is not an uncommon practice in European banking. Except normally you don't make up your own exchange rate. You actually use the one that the world is using, whatever it may happen to be at that time. So they got this huge plus column. And now everything's fine until you have, say, a global economic collapse. Then you're kind of in trouble. Which means there's no profit to be made on this anymore. And all of this, what was previously marked as a investment, becomes a negative. And you have a gigantic debt that seemingly came out of nowhere. Now, all of this happened without the people of Greece even knowing. This is all done without consultation by them or anyone else. And who set this whole thing up? Obama's friends over at Goldman Sachs. They were the ones who put this investment together. Now, a massive debt owed by a government only ever gets paid one way, by killing the healthcare and education. Not necessarily in that order, but those are the two things that die first. So in other words, this debt that's been incurred by speculative trade, which is stupid, is all going to be paid for by the people. And that, my friends, is exactly how Greece went into so much debt.